How well do you truly know your child's world? Are you watching closely enough, their friendships, their social media, the quiet moments when they seem distant? Would you see the warning signs if someone with authority and power crossed a line? February 16, 8:47 p.m. The biting cold of a winter evening wrapped itself around the quiet streets of Cedar Grove, a small, close-knit community in Mississippi. It was the kind of town where every face was familiar, and every family shared a story, but on this night, an unsettling silence hung in the air. The peace was broken by a discovery that would haunt the community for years to come. Imani Bennett, 17 years old, a cheerleader with a future filled with potential, was found lifeless. Her body lay in a desolate area just beyond the town's edge, a place no one had reason to visit. How did she end up there? And why? Cedar Grove was known for its unity, for the warmth of its people, and for traditions passed down through generations. But now, questions lingered like a shadow over its reputation. How could something so devastating happen here, in a town that prided itself on protecting its own? Imani was more than just a student. She was a beacon of hope, a young woman who inspired admiration from teachers, peers, and neighbors alike. Her energy was infectious, her smile unforgettable. Yet, behind the cheers and bright lights of the gymnasium, something else was at play. Something hidden. What events led to her untimely end? What choices, connections, and unspoken truths culminated in this tragedy? And most disturbingly, who could be capable of causing such harm to someone so beloved? As the hours turned into days and the investigation unfolded, Cedar Grove would come face to face with revelations that would test the very fabric of its trust. This is the story of Imani Bennett, a life full of promise, a town full of questions, and a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. Imani Bennett was a name that resonated throughout Cedar Grove, not just as the captain of the cheerleading squad but as a young woman full of life and promise. At 17, she was the embodiment of potential, smart, driven, and ambitious. Imani was the kind of student who balanced academics and athletics with ease, earning the respect and admiration of teachers and classmates alike. She was raised in a deeply rooted family, with her parents, James and Tasha Bennett, instilling in her the values of hard work, faith, and resilience. Growing up in Cedar Grove, a town where everyone knew each other's names, Imani thrived in a community that celebrated her accomplishments. Sundays were spent in the pews of Mount Zion Baptist Church, where she sang in the choir, and weekends often involved family dinners that left no seat at the table empty. Imani's determination was evident in everything she did. Whether it was leading her cheer squad at state competitions or staying up late to perfect her college essays, she exuded a focus and discipline that inspired those around her. She dreamed of becoming a lawyer, dedicating her life to helping others. For her family, she was a source of pride, a shining example of what hard work could achieve. But behind the bright exterior, there were vulnerabilities few could see. Like any teenager, Imani sought guidance and validation. Her parents' high expectations often left her feeling the weight of responsibility, and while she excelled at maintaining appearances, there were moments when the pressure seemed too much to bear. Her closest confidant was her best friend, Jada Washington, a bond forged in childhood that felt more like sisterhood. The two girls shared secrets, laughter, and dreams of a future far beyond Cedar Grove. But even Jada would later realize there were parts of Imani's life she never saw coming. How did a young woman so full of hope find herself caught in the storm that ultimately claimed her life? What choices led her from the safety of home to a path of betrayal, heartbreak, and tragedy? These questions weighed heavily on a community that had watched Imani grow and would now mourn her loss. At the center of Cedar Grove High School's proud tradition of excellence was its principal, Dr. Malcolm Carter. At 48 years old, Dr. Carter wasn't just a leader, he was a figure of admiration and respect, a man whose two-decade career in education had left an indelible mark on the community. Known for his unwavering dedication to academics and his passion for athletics, he often stood as a pillar of guidance for his students. Dr. Carter's influence extended beyond the school grounds. Parents saw him as a role model, a mentor who went above and beyond to ensure their children thrived. He was the kind of man who could rally a crowd at a basketball game and still have time to counsel a struggling student in the quiet of his office. His reputation was impeccable, or so it appeared. Outside the walls of Cedar Grove High, however, life was far more complicated. Dr. Carter was a father of two, raising his children in a home that, on the surface, appeared to be a picture of stability. But appearances can often conceal turmoil. His wife, Anika Solomon, had once been his greatest support, but a revelation shattered their carefully constructed world. Her affair with her boss upended the life he had worked tirelessly to build. The betrayal struck at the core of Malcolm's identity. A man who had built his life on trust and discipline found himself struggling with emotions he could barely contain. Depression took hold, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. The confident, steadfast principal became a man quietly battling inner chaos, his pain carefully hidden behind the polished exterior he maintained for his staff and students. Amid his struggles, Dr. Carter began to make decisions that would later be impossible to justify. In his search for comfort, he found himself in situations that he should have avoided entirely. What caused a man of such stature to veer so far from the principles he once embodied? What led him to risk everything for a path he could never retrace? These questions would soon cast a long shadow over Cedar Grove. It all began with small moments that, at first glance, seemed innocent enough. Dr. Malcolm Carter was known for his open-door policy, a principal who prided himself on being approachable. Imani Bennett had often taken advantage of this, stopping by his office for advice on academics or a word of encouragement after a tough practice. At first, their conversations were nothing more than a mentor guiding a student, but over time, the nature of these visits began to shift. Imani, struggling under the weight of her responsibilities and the expectations placed on her, found solace in Dr. Carter's attention. He listened when she spoke about the pressure of leading the cheer squad, the demands of her studies, and her dreams for the future. He offered advice, reassurance, and a sense of validation that she hadn't realized she craved. For her, these moments felt like guidance; for him, they began to feel like something else entirely. The boundaries of their relationship blurred during late afternoons in his office. What began as professional concern took a turn when conversations grew more personal. Malcolm began to share his own struggles, his failing marriage, his feelings of isolation, and the pain of betrayal he had endured. Imani, empathetic and trusting, listened without judgment. In her eyes, he was still the mentor she admired. But for Malcolm, the lines he should never have crossed were fading rapidly. Their interactions moved beyond the school walls. Secret meetings were arranged in quiet places where no one would recognize them. A local diner after dark, a nearby park on weekends, each rendezvous planned with the utmost care. They thought they were careful, cautious, but secrets have a way of leaving trails. To the outside world, Dr. Carter was still the respectable principal, and Imani was still the star cheerleader. But behind closed doors, their relationship had become something entirely different, something they both knew could never be exposed. The risks were mounting, but the allure of what they shared kept them tethered to a dangerous path. How long could they keep their secret? How far would they go to protect it? And at what cost? The whispers began quietly, like ripples on a still pond. Students noticed first, the lingering glances, the moments when Imani Bennett would leave Dr. Carter's office looking distracted, even uneasy. A few spoke up, mentioning to teachers that something about their interactions felt off. But Dr. Malcolm Carter was a man of stature, a trusted figure in Cedar Grove High School, and their concerns were brushed aside. "He's just being supportive," some said. "That's what a good principal does." The weight of his reputation was enough to silence further questions. But while the school ignored the murmurs, the changes in Imani were becoming harder to overlook. Teachers noted her slipping grades, an unusual turn for a student who once excelled in every subject. Assignments went unfinished, and her participation in class dwindled. On the field, Her coaches saw a cheerleader who had once commanded the squad with energy and precision now struggling to keep up. Even at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where Imani had been a shining light in the choir, her voice grew quieter, her attendance sporadic. At home, the shift was undeniable. James and Tasha Bennett, proud and attentive parents, began to notice their once vibrant daughter retreating into herself. She avoided family conversations, spent long hours in her room, and brushed off questions with vague answers. They turned to her best friend, Jada Washington, desperate for insight. But even Jada was in the dark, left to wonder what had caused the sudden change in the girl she knew so well. The signs were there for anyone willing to look closely: slipping grades, lost focus, a growing distance from those who cared about her. Yet, the pieces of the puzzle remained scattered, ignored by a school reluctant to question one of its most respected figures in the community that couldn't imagine such darkness in their midst. What if someone had asked the right questions? What if those early warnings hadn't been dismissed? These are the questions Cedar Grove would be left to grapple with when the truth finally emerged. He told her everything she wanted to hear. Dr. Malcolm Carter promised Imani Bennett a future, one where they could be together openly, where their love would no longer need to hide in the shadows. He spoke of his plans to divorce his wife, reassuring her that she wasn't just a passing infatuation. To Imani, it sounded like a dream. He told her he adored her, that she made him feel alive again. But behind the words of devotion lay something far more calculated. Imani's world began to shift when she noticed the signs, changes in her body that she couldn't ignore. Nervous and unsure, she went to a nearby pharmacy after school, captured on surveillance cameras purchasing a pregnancy test kit. The fear and hope she carried back to her room that evening were almost unbearable. When the test confirmed her suspicion, her mind raced with possibilities and questions. She couldn't keep this to herself. She needed to tell Malcolm, the man she trusted, the man she believed loved her. That evening, she met him in their usual spot, her hands trembling as she delivered the news. "I'm pregnant," she said softly, her voice a mix of fear and expectation. His reaction was immediate but not what she had hoped. Shock swept across his face, followed by a silence that made the air feel heavier than she could bear. For a moment, he said nothing, his mind racing as he tried to grasp the weight of her words. Then, regaining his composure, he reassured her. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll figure this out together." But his words lacked the warmth she needed. He asked her what her plans were, whether she intended to keep the baby. When she said yes, his discomfort deepened. Malcolm worked quickly to shift the narrative. He reminded her of the love he had professed, weaving a story of a future where they could be together, where the obstacles standing in their way would vanish. He insisted that the pregnancy had to remain a secret, for now. Once the divorce is finalized, he told her, everything will fall into place. "Trust me." Imani, young and trusting, wanted to believe him. She clung to the promises of a life where their love could flourish, where they could raise their child together without fear or judgment. But as Malcolm spoke of their future, his mind was already calculating the cost of her decision and how far he would go to protect the life he had built from crumbling entirely. The unraveling had begun, and neither of them could see how close they were to the edge. The next day, Malcolm Carter called Imani Bennett, his voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within him. She picked up eagerly, her heart racing with hope. For her, this was the moment they would finally address the future he had promised, a future where their love could be free, where they could raise their child together without fear of judgment. "When will you let people know about us?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with both excitement and trepidation. Malcolm paused, choosing his words carefully. "That's why I wanted to talk to you," he began. "Imani, listen to me." He said her name slowly, almost gently, as if to soften what he was about to say. "I want you. You know that. But this isn't the time. You're too young to be a mother right now. There's so much life ahead of you, so much we can enjoy together before taking on the responsibilities of raising a child." His tone was persuasive, calculated. He painted a picture of a carefree future, one where they could live without the weight of obligations. "I love you," he said, the words deliberate, designed to tether her to his narrative. "We'll have kids, but not now. Not like this. Trust me on this, Imani." But her unease was clear. "What are you saying, Malcolm?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He sighed, pretending to struggle with the gravity of his response. "We need to keep this between us. If anyone finds out, about us, about the baby, it'll destroy everything. My career, your reputation, everything we've worked so hard for." He then offered a solution, one that made her stomach turn but that he presented as their only option. "I know a way," he continued. "There's a substance, it's safe, and it'll take care of this without us having to go to a hospital." "Going to a hospital would expose everything. You know that, right?" Imani hesitated, her thoughts racing. But Malcolm, ever the manipulator, leaned further into his web of deceit. "This isn't the end for us, Imani. I promise. I just need time to finalize my divorce. Once that's done, we can be together, and we can have the life we've dreamed of. But for now, you have to trust me." His words were smooth, convincing, each one crafted to maintain her trust while steering her away from questioning his motives. She reluctantly agreed but gave him an ultimatum: 2 weeks to finalize his divorce and make their relationship public. Malcolm nodded, his voice steady, hiding the turmoil brewing beneath. "I promise, Imani. 2 weeks. Just give me that." But deep down, Malcolm had no intention of fulfilling those promises. Every word was a lie designed to buy him time, to keep her quiet while he plotted his next move. He couldn't risk the truth coming out, not about the affair, not about the pregnancy, and certainly not about what was still to come. Imani, trusting and hopeful, assured him that their secret was safe. She had kept it from her parents, her coaches, even her best friend, Jada. "No one knows," she said with a faint smile. "I've been careful, just like you asked." She couldn't see the danger lurking in the promises he made. But Malcolm could. He saw it clearly, and in his mind, there was only one way to ensure their secret remained buried forever. The text arrived late in the evening, its tone cold and abrupt. "You need to get tested," read the message from Anika Solomon, Malcolm's estranged wife. She had always been concise, but the weight of those 4 words was unlike anything he had ever felt before. Anika explained that she had recently tested positive for HIV and believed he might also be a carrier. "I didn't know how else to tell you," she wrote. "You need to know. I'm sorry." Malcolm stared at his phone, the words blurring before his eyes. His heart pounded, his mind racing through every possibility. Could it be true? Was this just another way for her to twist the knife after their bitter separation? Or was it the devastating truth? There was only one way to find out. The next day, he went to a clinic in a neighboring town, ensuring no one from Cedar Grove would see him. The wait for the results felt endless, the minutes dragging like hours. When the doctor finally returned, Malcolm's worst fears were confirmed. He tested positive. The room felt as though it was closing in around him, the air thick and suffocating. His mind swirled with questions and regrets, but one thought stood out above all: what now? Panic began to set in as he considered the implications. This diagnosis wasn't just about his health, it was about everything he had tried so desperately to keep hidden. If Imani found out, the delicate balance he had been maintaining would collapse entirely. The affair, the pregnancy, his illness, it would all come crashing down. His career, his reputation, his life as he knew it, would be over. Malcolm returned home that night, his thoughts spiraling deeper into chaos. The walls of his once pristine world were closing in, and he was desperate to find a way out. Sitting alone in the dim light of his living room, he replayed every interaction, every promise he had made to Imani. The stakes had never been higher, and he couldn't afford to make a single misstep. He began to calculate, every move a cold and deliberate attempt to salvage what little control he had left. Imani had to remain silent. She had to stay out of the public eye, away from questions, away from suspicion. But deep down, Malcolm knew that her silence was a fragile thing. Her growing confidence in their relationship, her expectations for their future, it was all a ticking clock he couldn't stop. That night, Malcolm crossed a line even he hadn't anticipated. The thought formed slowly, dark and unrelenting, until it took hold completely. If Imani posed a risk he couldn't contain, there was only one way to ensure her silence. It was a turning point, a moment where desperation overshadowed reason, and the man who had once been a pillar of his community began plotting an act that would forever seal his fate. The call came just after sunset. Malcolm's voice was calm, measured, even reassuring. "We need to talk," he told Imani. "I've been thinking about everything, and I have a plan for us. Meet me at our usual spot tonight." The words, carefully chosen, were designed to disarm her, to rebuild the trust that had been fraying at the edges. He framed the meeting as a turning point, a step toward the future he had promised her. Imani hesitated. Something about the tone of his voice left her uneasy. She wanted to believe him, to cling to the hope that this meeting would finally bring clarity. But the gnawing doubt in her gut wouldn't let go. As she got ready to leave, she made a decision. Before heading out, she texted her best friend, Jada Washington. "I'm meeting Malcolm. Something important. Here's my location, just in case." She hit send, the faintest flicker of caution in a heart still full of trust. The meeting spot was secluded, far from prying eyes. Malcolm stood waiting, his figure silhouetted against the faint glow of a nearby street lamp. Imani approached, clutching the hope that this would be the moment he proved his love was real. He greeted her with a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've thought a lot about what you said," he began, his tone soothing. "I want us to move forward, but we have to be smart." He pulled out a small vial, the liquid inside faintly glowing under the dim light. "This will take care of the pregnancy," he said, his voice steady. "It's discreet, safe. No one will know, and we can move on from this. I'll handle everything. You just need to trust me." Imani hesitated, staring at the vial in his hand. Doubt flashed across her face, but Malcolm leaned in, his voice soft and persuasive. "This is just the first step for us. Once the divorce is finalized, we'll be together, I promise. You'll see." His words wrapped around her like a net, pulling her closer to his web of deceit. With trembling hands, Imani took the vial, her trust outweighing her apprehension. She swallowed its contents, unaware of the betrayal coursing through her veins. At first, nothing happened. She looked at Malcolm, searching for reassurance. But his eyes had grown cold, distant. Minutes passed, and then the pain began, sharp, unrelenting, spreading through her body like fire. Imani doubled over, gasping for air, her strength draining with each passing second. She clutched at Malcolm, her eyes wide with terror, but he didn't move. He stood there, watching, his face unreadable. Every ounce of humanity seemed to drain from him as he observed her suffering in silence. The trust she had placed in him, the love she believed they shared, was met with nothing but cold detachment. As the life ebbed from her, Imani's thoughts turned to the people she loved, her parents, her best friend, the future she would never see. And then, there was only silence. Malcolm moved swiftly, dragging her lifeless body into the shadows. He worked methodically, as though erasing evidence of her existence would somehow erase the weight of what he had done. The darkness of the night swallowed them both, leaving only questions for the morning, a shared location, an unanswered text, and a body that would soon be found. The betrayal was complete, and Cedar Grove would never be the same. When Imani Bennett didn't return home that night, the worry in the Bennett household quickly turned to panic. James and Tasha Bennett knew their daughter's habits. She wasn't one to stay out late without letting them know. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. Messages went unanswered. The hours dragged by, and the unease in their hearts grew unbearable. Desperate for answers, they reached out to her friends. Jada Washington, her best friend, felt a sinking weight in her chest when she received their call. "She told me she was meeting someone," Jada admitted hesitantly, "but she didn't say much. She sent me her location before she went." The shared pin, sent as a precaution, was now their only clue. Tasha's voice cracked, tears spilling over her face. They filed a missing persons report with the Cedar Grove Police Department, sharing every detail they could, what she had been wearing, who she might have spoken to, and the location pin her best friend Jada Washington had received before she vanished. The investigation began immediately, but leads were scarce. Officers canvassed the area around the shared pin, a remote stretch of woods on the outskirts of town. The dense underbrush offered no immediate signs of disturbance. Days passed, and the Bennetts held on to hope, but the silence only deepened the fear gripping the community. As the search intensified, investigators expanded their efforts, interviewing friends, family, and school staff. They obtained surveillance footage from nearby businesses and traffic cameras, hoping for a break. The investigators pressed further, focusing on the area around the location pin Jada had shared. A thorough search uncovered a discarded cell phone, partially buried in the dirt near a shallow creek. The phone was damaged but not beyond repair. Forensic experts worked diligently to retrieve its contents, uncovering messages, call logs, and even location data that tied Malcolm Carter directly to Imani's final moments. CCTV footage played a pivotal role. Cameras from a nearby gas station showed Malcolm's car heading toward the wooded area at a time that coincided with Imani's last known location. Additional footage captured his car returning several hours later, its taillights disappearing into the dark streets of Cedar Grove. These visual timestamps created a timeline investigators couldn't ignore. Surveillance footage from the pharmacy added another layer to the case. It showed Imani purchasing a pregnancy test just days before her death. The timestamp matched phone records indicating she had called Malcolm shortly after. Investigators theorized this was when she informed him of her pregnancy, a key turning point that eventually led to the crime. The evidence against Malcolm continued to mount. Forensic analysis of the woods revealed tire tracks matching his vehicle. With mounting evidence, the police brought Malcolm in for questioning. Initially, he denied any involvement, claiming he had no idea where Imani could be. But under the weight of the evidence, surveillance footage, recovered phone data, and conflicting details in his alibi, his story began to unravel. After hours of interrogation, Malcolm's composure cracked. He confessed to having met Imani that night, spinning a desperate narrative about their relationship. But as investigators probed deeper, his lies fell apart. Confronted with the evidence, he finally admitted to what he had done. He led officers to the secluded spot in the woods where he had disposed of Imani's body, his voice devoid of remorse as he recounted the events. The recovery of Imani's body brought closure to the search but shattered the hearts of her family and community. Malcolm Carter, once a figure of trust and respect, was now at the center of a crime that would forever stain Cedar Grove. His arrest marked the beginning of a trial that would expose the full extent of his betrayal and the lengths he had gone to protect his secrets. When news of Malcolm's arrest broke, Cedar Grove was rocked to its core. The community that had once held him in such high esteem now grappled with the horrifying reality that their trusted principal was a predator. Parents who had once relied on him for guidance now questioned how they could have missed the warning signs. Teachers who had worked alongside him felt the weight of guilt and disbelief. And for Imani's family, the betrayal cut deeper than words could express. As the investigation into Imani Bennett's death deepened, a discovery emerged that added yet another layer of tragedy to an already devastating case. During the forensic examination, medical reports confirmed that Imani had been infected with HIV. The diagnosis shocked investigators, adding urgency to their efforts to unravel the events leading to her death. The timeline of her infection was pieced together through meticulous examination. Imani, who had been in excellent health prior to her relationship with Dr. Malcolm Carter, showed no previous indicators of the virus. Her medical records were clear, leaving investigators to conclude that the infection was recent, and most likely tied to her relationship with Malcolm. This revelation not only connected Malcolm further to Imani's death but also painted a chilling picture of the risks he had knowingly exposed her to. Investigators discovered that Malcolm himself had been diagnosed with HIV shortly before Imani's death, a fact he had concealed from everyone, including her. Forensic evidence and medical experts confirmed the timeline, showing a direct link between Malcolm's diagnosis and Imani's infection. This discovery not only underscored the depth of his betrayal but also revealed the recklessness of his actions. He had not only manipulated and endangered her emotionally but had also jeopardized her life physically, all while seeking to maintain his own secrets. When the news of Imani's diagnosis broke, the community was left reeling. Parents and students alike grappled with the horror of what had happened within the walls of a school they had trusted so deeply. For the Bennetts, it was an additional layer of heartbreak, knowing that their daughter's life had been forever altered even before it was cruelly taken from her. The revelation of the HIV diagnosis became a key point in the trial, further highlighting Malcolm's callous disregard for Imani's well-being. Prosecutors argued that his silence about his condition not only showed his manipulative nature but also demonstrated the extreme lengths he was willing to go to protect himself. In the end, Imani's tragic infection served as yet another testament to the devastating consequences of Malcolm's actions, a betrayal so complete that it left scars on everyone it touched. The courtroom was silent as the trial of Dr. Malcolm Carter began, every seat filled with members of the Cedar Grove community, and those who had once admired the man now standing accused of unspeakable crimes. The air was heavy with anticipation, a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief at how a respected principal had betrayed the trust of an entire town. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They began with the story of Imani Bennett, a bright, promising 17-year-old whose life was irrevocably altered by Malcolm's manipulative actions. Jurors listened intently as they detailed how Malcolm, a man twice her age, had used his position of authority to gain her trust and exploit her vulnerability. He had made her believe in a future that didn't exist, promising love, stability, and marriage, while concealing a dark truth that would ultimately cost her everything. Imani's pregnancy became a focal point in the trial. Prosecutors presented text messages between her and Malcolm, revealing his initial shock and his attempts to persuade her to keep the relationship and the pregnancy a secret. The messages painted a chilling picture of a man determined to protect his reputation at any cost. They recounted how he convinced her to trust him, only to later pressure her to terminate the pregnancy under the guise of preserving their future together. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as medical experts testified about Imani's HIV diagnosis. They explained how forensic evidence linked the timing of her infection to her relationship with Malcolm. The revelation that he had been aware of his own diagnosis and knowingly exposed her to the virus added another layer of betrayal to the case. His silence about his condition was presented as not just reckless but deeply cruel, a decision that robbed Imani of the chance to protect herself. Forensic analysts presented surveillance footage showing Imani's final moments of trust in Malcolm. Clips from a pharmacy depicted her buying a pregnancy test days before her death, followed by a series of phone calls to Malcolm that aligned with the timeline of her disappearance. The chilling footage of Malcolm's car heading toward the woods the night she vanished further solidified the connection between him and the crime. But it was Malcolm's own words during the police interrogation that delivered one of the most damning blows. The prosecution played a recording of his confession, where he described luring Imani to their meeting under false pretenses, giving her a substance he claimed would terminate the pregnancy, and watching as her life slipped away. The cold detachment in his voice left the courtroom shaken. The Bennetts, sitting in the front row, held each other tightly as every detail of their daughter's suffering was laid bare. Tasha wept quietly, her husband James clenching his fists in a futile attempt to hold back his own grief. The community, too, was visibly shaken, grappling with the betrayal of a man they had trusted to guide their children. The defense attempted to paint Malcolm as a man who had succumbed to pressure and despair, citing his failing marriage and struggles with depression. But their arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence. Witnesses, including Imani's best friend, Jada Washington, and her teachers, spoke about the changes they had seen in her, her declining grades, her withdrawn demeanor, and the fear she tried to hide. In her closing argument, the prosecutor addressed the jury with unflinching resolve. This man didn't just betray Imani Bennett, he destroyed her. He manipulated her into believing in a future that never existed, knowingly exposed her to a deadly virus, and ultimately took her life to protect his own secrets. This was not desperation. This was calculated, deliberate, and heartless. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Malcolm Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his once celebrated career reduced to ashes. As Malcolm was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the weight of his actions hung heavy in the room. The Bennetts, though heartbroken, expressed relief that justice had been served. For the community of Cedar Grove, the trial was a painful reckoning, a reminder of the devastating consequences of misplaced trust and the enduring strength of a family seeking justice for their beloved daughter. The story of Imani Bennett is a sobering reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked power and broken trust. Dr. Malcolm Carter's actions highlighted the importance of safeguarding boundaries in mentorship roles and ensuring that those in positions of authority are held accountable. Imani's legacy now stands as a call for change. Her tragic story spurred the community of Cedar Grove to implement stricter oversight in schools, fostering an environment where trust is earned and protected. Her loss has become a symbol of resilience and the urgent need for vigilance. As we reflect on this tragedy, we must ask ourselves, how can we better protect those who rely on us? How do we ensure that authority is never misused? And how do we rebuild trust once it has been broken? Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more stories that uncover the truths we must face together.